On the night of September 19th, 1961, Barney Hill was running desperately towards his car across a dark highway in New Hampshire. He was screaming hysterically. His wife, Betty, could barely understand what he was saying between sobs. "They're going to capture us. They're going to capture us." Minutes earlier, he had been looking through binoculars at what he thought was a commercial airplane. But what he saw through the windows of that aircraft were not human pilots. When they arrived home hours later, their watches were stopped, Betty's dress was ripped, Barney's shoes were inexplicably scuffed, and they couldn't remember 2 whole hours of that night. What they would discover under hypnosis would forever change popular culture, modern ufology, and our collective imagination about extraterrestrials. This is a true and fully documented story of the first widely investigated alien abduction in history. September 1961. The United States is in the midst of the Cold War. The space race has just begun. And in the tranquil mountains of New Hampshire, an interracial couple is about to experience something that will define the alien abduction phenomenon for the next 6 decades. I am your name, and in this episode we are going to analyze in depth one of the most documented and controversial cases in the history of ufology, the Betty and Barney Hill case. Why is this case so important? Because it was the first to report what are now iconic features of alien abductions: missing time, gray beings with large black eyes, medical examinations aboard ships. None of this existed in popular culture before the Hills. And unlike many other cases, this one is backed up by official Air Force documents, recordings of hypnotic sessions, psychiatric reports, corroborating witnesses, and radar detections. But it is also surrounded by controversy, compelling skeptical theories, and questions that remain unanswered more than 60 years later. So buckle up. We're going to examine every detail of this extraordinary case. To understand this case, we first need to get to know its protagonists. Because Betty and Barney Hill weren't attention seekers or UFO enthusiasts. In fact, they were the exact opposite. Barney Hill was born in 1922 in Virginia. He was an African-American man, a World War II veteran, a postal worker, and a civil rights activist. With an IQ of 140, Barney was meticulous, skeptical by nature, and deeply rational. Betty, born in 1919, was a social worker with a degree from the University of New Hampshire. Specializing in child welfare cases, Betty was practical, educated, and, until that moment, completely skeptical about paranormal phenomena. In 1961, being an interracial couple in the United States was extraordinarily rare. Betty was white, Barney was black, and they lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Both were active members of the NAACP, leaders in their Unitarian congregation, and Barney even served on the local Civil Rights Commission. These weren't dreamers or people prone to fantasy. They were respected citizens, serious professionals, with reputations to protect. The last thing they wanted was public attention over something so unbelievable. September 1961. John F. Kennedy has been president for just 9 months. The Bay of Pigs invasion occurred in April. Construction of the Berlin Wall began in August. Tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union are at their highest point. In January of that same year, President Eisenhower had warned about the military-industrial complex in his farewell address. People still trusted their government. If you saw something strange in the sky, your instinct was to report it to the authorities. And that's exactly what the Hills did. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. On the night of September 19, 1961, Betty and Barney were driving home after a belated honeymoon vacation. They had visited Niagara Falls and Montreal, Canada. They left a restaurant in Vermont around 10 p.m., expecting to arrive in Portsmouth, New Hampshire around 2 a.m. A straightforward 178-mile trip along Route 3, through the scenic White Mountains. They had their dog, Delcy, with them. It was a clear night, perfect for driving. Barney, who worked night shifts at the post office and drove 60 miles a day, was comfortable driving at night. Betty was in the passenger seat, probably reflecting on the vacation as she watched the dark landscape pass by the window. None of them imagined that in the next few hours they would experience something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Betty was the first to notice it. A bright point of light in the sky, moving from beneath the moon and the planet Jupiter upwards in a westward direction. It wasn't a normal commercial airliner. It was moving strangely. "Barney, look at that," he should have said. Barney, ever the skeptic, probably muttered something about satellites or airplanes. After all, they were near commercial air routes to Montreal. But Betty insisted. She took the binoculars they kept in the car and looked more closely. Through binoculars, he saw a strangely shaped craft with multicolored lights traveling across the face of the moon. It didn't move like any aircraft he had ever seen before. For the next few minutes, as they continued driving along Route 3, the object seemed to follow them. It would disappear behind the mountains and reappear. Barney, finally intrigued but not alarmed, decided to stop for a closer look. Just south of Twin Mountain, Barney pulled the car into a scenic picnic area. He got out with Delcy to walk the dog and get a better look at what was floating in the night sky. Betty stayed near the car, also looking up. Through binoculars, Barney observed what he reasoned was a commercial airliner heading to Vermont en route to Montreal. Flashing red light, a structure that appeared to have wings. Yes, definitely an airplane. But then something impossible happened. Without appearing to have turned, without changing its orientation, the ship began to descend rapidly in their direction. Not towards Montreal, towards them. Barney lowered the binoculars, then raised them again. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The object was now much closer, and it was definitely not a commercial airplane. They quickly got into the car. Barney drove ahead, but the object followed them. He stopped again, this time near Indian Head. And this is where the story becomes truly terrifying. Barney got out of the car once more, binoculars in hand, and walked toward an open field. Betty was yelling for him to come back, but he was mesmerized by what he saw. The object descended until it was what Barney estimated to be between 50 and 80 feet above him, only 300 feet away. The ship was completely silent. From its sides, red structures began to extend telescopically, like bat wings. A long structure descended from the bottom, and then Barney saw the windows. Through his binoculars, Barney observed rows of illuminated windows along the length of the ship, and behind those windows, uniformed figures in gray who were looking directly at him. They were not human. Barney would later describe this feeling as seeing himself as a hunted rabbit. He recalled a story from his childhood in Virginia, hunting rabbits with his cousin. A baby rabbit thought it was safe hiding behind a small bush, unaware that it was completely exposed, vulnerable, about to be caught. He reached for his pistol on his belt. His hand wouldn't move. A voice in his head, which was not his own voice, told him, "Don't lower the binoculars." And then he had a thought that filled him with absolute terror. We are about to be captured. Something inside Barney broke. She started screaming. She ran hysterically toward the car, shouting over and over again, "They're going to capture us! They're going to capture us!" Betty had never seen her husband like this. Barney was a large man with a deep voice, always calm. But now he was terrified in a way she couldn't understand. He started the engine and accelerated down the dark road, getting away from that place as fast as possible. Betty stuck her head out the window, trying to track the ship's location. She could still see it, following them, and then something happened that neither of them could explain. Loud, rhythmic beeps began to sound from the trunk of the car. Beep, 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 beep. It wasn't the horn. It wasn't the radio. It was coming from inside the car, from the back. Betty and Barney instantly felt drowsy, an overwhelming and inexplicable fatigue, as if someone had flipped a switch in their brains. And then nothing. 2 hours later, the same beeping, coming from the trunk. Betty and Barney woke up in the car. Barney was still driving. They were on Route 3, but now they were 35 miles further down the road. They didn't remember driving that distance. They didn't remember anything from the last 2 hours. They looked at each other, confused. What had just happened? Had they fallen asleep at the wheel? Impossible. Barney remembered being wide awake, terrified, running away. They continued driving home in silence, each trying to process what they couldn't remember. They arrived home in Portsmouth around 5 a.m., much later than expected. The journey should have taken 4 hours from their departure from Colebrook. It had taken 7. Strange things. Betty insisted that her luggage be left by the back door, not in the main part of the house. She didn't know why, but she felt an inexplicable compulsion to do so. They both felt an urgent need to bathe, not just shower. They needed to wash something they couldn't name. Their watches had stopped working, completely, at the same time. Barney's shoes, the ones he had worn that night, were strangely scraped, as if he had dragged his feet violently against concrete or metal. Betty's dress was torn in several places, and there was something else, a pinkish powder on the surface of the fabric. They went to check the car. In the trunk were bright, concentric circles that definitely hadn't been there before. Perfect circles, as if something had been placed there. During the following days, both Betty and Barney experienced unexplained physical symptoms. Barney developed a ring of warts around his groin, an almost perfect circle. He'd never had warts there before. Betty started having nightmares. Or at least, that's what she thought they were. 10 days after the encounter, Betty began having intensely vivid dreams. Dreams that seemed too real, too specific, too visceral. He had them for 5 nights in a row, and then they never happened again. In these dreams, she and Barney were taken to a ship. Small beings between 4 and 5 feet tall, with gray skin and large, dark eyes, dressed in blue uniforms, led them through lit corridors. They separated her from Barney. She was taken to a room where she was placed on a table. The beings performed what appeared to be a medical examination. One of them, whom Betty thought was a leader, seemed to be able to communicate with her. He showed her things. He showed her a map, a star map. Betty was skeptical by nature. After all, she had been raised to believe in the scientific method, in things that could be measured and proven. Before this experience, she thought anyone who believed in things too radical was a bit of a crackpot. But these dreams were different, too coherent, too detailed. He decided to write them. The day after the incident, the Hills did something that revealed their mindset. They reported what they had seen to the official authorities. They called Pease Air Force Base and filed an official report with Project Blue Book, the Air Force program to investigate UFOs. This is crucial to understand. In 1961, reporting a UFO to the authorities was what you were expected to do if you were a responsible citizen. The Hills still trusted their government to investigate these things seriously. The report was filed as an observation of a brightly lit cigar-shaped craft. But here's the strange thing. After they filed the report, the Air Force never contacted them. They never followed up. They never sent investigators. This is particularly surprising because the Project Blue Book files show something disturbing. A UFO had been detected and tracked by Air Force radar operators at Concord Station, Vermont, less than 7 hours before the Hill sighting. And another UFO was detected by the Precision Approach radar at Pease Air Force Base just 2 hours after the Hill's visual sighting. Coincidence? On September 26, just a few days later, Betty wrote a letter to the director of NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, retired Major Donald Kehoe. Betty had borrowed her book from the Portsmouth Public Library. It was the first book she had ever read about UFOs. In October, a NICAP researcher named Walter Webb came to interview them. It was during this interview that Barney revealed something he hadn't clearly articulated until then. The beings he saw through the binoculars were somehow not human. It was Walter Webb, along with other NICAP researchers named Homan and Jackson, who noticed something the Hills had not considered. They left the restaurant in Vermont around 10 p.m. They arrived home around 5 a.m. The trip was 178 miles. That trip should have taken approximately 4 hours, maybe 4.5 with stops. It had taken 7 hours. Where were the missing 2 hours? The Hills had no answer, and that question began to haunt them. The following months were difficult for the Hills. Barney began to develop severe physical symptoms: ulcers, dangerously high blood pressure, chronic insomnia, paralyzing anxiety. Betty suffered from recurring nightmares, constant apprehension, and a feeling that something terrible had happened that she couldn't fully remember. Barney developed a problem with alcoholism. This wasn't a man seeking attention. This was a man being destroyed by something he didn't understand. Both worked long hours. Both remained active volunteers in the community. Barney continued his work with the NAACP, even conducting tests at Portsmouth barbershops to expose racial discrimination, sending black men to get haircuts. 4 out of 9 places turned them away. But internally, they were breaking down. In November 1962, they attended a meeting at their church where Captain Ben H., Swett of the Air Force, was giving a lecture on hypnosis. They approached him privately and told him their story. Swett suggested to them that hypnotherapy might help them remember what had happened during those 2 lost hours, or at least help them process the trauma. Betty and Barney Hill walked to the office of Boston psychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon for their first scheduled appointment. Dr. Simon knew almost nothing about his case. When Barney showed up with his wife, Simon briefly wondered if their interracial marriage might be involved in Barney's problems. He would soon realize that the situation was much more complex. Benjamin Simon was a respected psychiatrist specializing in hypnotherapy. He had worked with war veterans, helping them process trauma. He was skeptical by nature, scientific in his approach, and meticulous in his method. What he was about to discover would leave him deeply disturbed. Between January 4th and June 27th, 1964, the Hills drove to Boston once a week for hypnosis sessions. Dr. Simon established a rigorous protocol. I would hypnotize Betty and Barney separately. I would record each session on tape. Upon waking, he would give them post-hypnotic suggestions to forget what they had revealed. This would prevent them from contaminating each other's testimonies. Show, vintage tape recorder. This detail is crucial. Betty and Barney didn't know what the other was saying under hypnosis. Dr. Simon loaded the tape cartridges into his recording machine. Barney was in a deep trance, and he began to recount what had happened after he fled the field to his car. But Barney wasn't calm. His voice began to rise. He became more and more agitated as I relived the encounter. She screamed, hysterically. Dr. Simon would later admit that he had never had a patient so aroused under hypnosis. At one point, he feared Barney might try to jump out of the office window. Barney, I feel like a rabbit. I feel like a rabbit. Dr. Simon, what do you mean by that? Barney, I was rabbit hunting in Virginia, and this cute little bunny went into a bush. The poor little bunny thought he was safe, hidden behind a little stem, and I jumped on him and caught the poor little bunny who thought he was safe. And then Barney described the eyes. He called them enveloping eyes. Large, black, hypnotic, eyes that looked directly at him, that seemed to penetrate his mind. This was the first detailed description of what we now know as the alien greys. Small, gray-skinned beings with huge, almond-shaped black eyes. Over the following months under deep hypnosis, both Betty and Barney recounted an extraordinarily consistent story. After the beeping from the trunk, small men appeared on the road. They blocked the car. They opened the doors. They were taken out of the vehicle and led along a path through the forest to a craft resting on the ground. They were taken inside via a ramp. They separated them. They were taken to different rooms where they were placed on tables and subjected to what appeared to be medical examinations. They took skin samples. They examined her eyes, ears, and mouths. They checked her limbs. One of the beings performed a painful procedure on Betty that she described as a needle being inserted into her abdomen, possibly taking eggs or performing a pregnancy test. During the examination, one of the beings, Betty thought of him as a leader, seemed to communicate with her. He showed her a 3-dimensional map of stars connected by lines. He asked him where he came from. The being pointed to 2 stars on the map. Consistency. Here's what's truly disturbing. Betty and Barney, hypnotized separately, without knowing what the other was saying, told the same story. The same beings, the same type of ship, the same type of exam, the same procedures. Dr. Simon, despite being deeply skeptical about the literalness of the experience, publicly admitted, I implicitly believe in the honesty of these people. Skeptical researcher Philip Klass, who later listened to the tapes, said, as I listened to Barney reliving his UFO encounter, I could fully agree with the doctor that Barney had seen something, and it had been a terrifying experience. Dr. Simon gave Betty a post-hypnotic suggestion. She could draw a copy of the star map she had described seeing, that hologram-like, 3-dimensional projection the being had shown her. Around January 6, 1964, Betty drew the map. It displayed several stars connected by lines of different types, some solid, others dotted. The bee had told him that the solid lines represented frequent trade routes. The dotted lines represented occasional expedition routes. For years, this map was considered a fascinating enigma. Did it truly represent a real star system? Was it possible that Betty had seen precise astronomical information she couldn't have known? In 1969, an elementary school teacher and amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish became obsessed with Betty Hill's map. He spent years building a three-dimensional model of nearby stars using string and beads based on stellar distances published in the 1969 Gliese Star Catalog. By studying thousands of viewpoints over several years, he found something amazing. A single viewpoint seemed to match Hill's map almost perfectly. That viewpoint was from the Zeta Reticuli double star system, about 39 light-years from Earth. Fish's interpretation was published in Astronomy magazine in December 1974 and caused a sensation. Was it possible that Betty Hill had actually seen an authentic extraterrestrial navigation star map? But in the early 1990s, the European Hipparcos mission, a satellite that measured the distances to more than 100,000 stars with unprecedented accuracy, showed that some of the stars in Fish's interpretation were in fact much farther away than previously thought. The Fish triangle did not exist in the positions she had calculated. To her credit, Marjorie Fish publicly rejected her own hypothesis. Furthermore, subsequent reevaluations determined that Zeta Reticuli is less than 2 billion years old, probably too young for complex intelligent life to have developed. The star map, which once seemed to be solid evidence, became another unsolved mystery, or simply the product of Betty's imagination under hypnosis. In 1966, writer John G. Fuller secured the cooperation of the Hills and Dr. Simon to write a comprehensive book about the case. The book was titled The Interrupted Journey: 2 Lost Hours Aboard a Flying Saucer. It included full transcripts of the hypnosis sessions, drawings of the star map, illustrations of the ship and the beings, and a detailed analysis of the entire experience. The book was an immediate success. It went through multiple printings and became a bestseller. Look magazine published a 2-part article about the interracial couple who claimed to have been abducted by aliens. On October 26, 1965, United Press International had picked up the story, and the Hills gained international attention. Suddenly, Betty and Barney Hill became the most famous people in the world of ufology. To illustrate the book and articles, artist David Baker was commissioned to create visual representations of the beings the Hills had described. Baker created what would become the definitive image of the modern gray alien. Large, bulbous head, huge black eyes, grayish skin, small, thin body. This image would become iconic. But here's something important we should note. Before the hypnosis sessions, Betty's written descriptions of the aliens were very different. She described them as short men with black hair and large, Jimmy Durante-type noses. Only after hypnosis did their descriptions change to match what we now call grays. Because, in 1990, researcher Martin Kottmeyer published an article entitled Entirely Unpredisposed that posed a disturbing question. Is it possible that Barney's memories under hypnosis were influenced by a television episode? On February 10, 1964, the science fiction series The Outer Limits aired an episode called The Bolero Shield. This episode featured an alien with large, sweeping eyes who uttered a memorable line. In all universes, in all units beyond universes, all who have eyes that speak. This episode aired just 12 days before Barney's first substantial hypnotic session on February 22, 1964. Coincidence? There's more. The third most relevant episode of The Outer Limits was called The Children of Spider County and aired on February 17, 1964, just 5 days before Barney's session where he first described wraparound eyes in detail. This episode featured aliens with even more prominent slanted eyes. The awkward question. This does not mean the Hills were lying. Human memory, especially under hypnosis, is extraordinarily vulnerable to contamination. It is entirely possible that Barney watched these episodes, consciously or simply having them in the background while doing other things, and that those images were unconsciously incorporated into his memories during hypnosis. Hypnosis is not a time machine that recovers perfect memories. It is an altered state of consciousness where suggestion plays a huge role. Dr. Simon himself was acutely aware of this. That's why he concluded that Betty had probably dreamed the abduction, and Barney had absorbed her story, especially since many of the most vivid details matched the dream descriptions Betty had written down months earlier. Historian Matthew Bowman, in his book The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, Alien Encounters, Civil Rights, and the New Age in America, argues that Barney Hill's struggles with racism were a profound part of this encounter. Think about it. Barney was a black man in America in 1961. He was married to a white woman at a time when that was legal in New Hampshire, but illegal in many southern states. She worked extensively at the NAACP. She had conducted tests that demonstrated direct racial discrimination in her own city. 4 out of 9 barbershops refused to serve black men. Constant and invisible racial stress. In his private notes, Dr. Simon came to suspect that the abduction story might have stemmed from unaddressed psychological incapacities, the stress of being an interracial couple in the United States of the 1960s, and even speculated about Barney's possible latent homosexuality. Barney suffered from ulcers, high blood pressure, alcoholism, insomnia, and anxiety. By the time he arrived at Simon's office, he was not a healthy man. Is it possible that a psychological breakdown, triggered by a genuine but mundane UFO sighting, could transform into an abduction narrative under the influence of hypnosis? Modern research on false memory shows us something fascinating and terrifying. One of the strongest predictors of false memory is a vivid imagination. People who score high on magical ideation, those more likely to believe in paranormal phenomena, tarot readings, etc., are more susceptible to developing false memories that feel completely real. Hypnosis can create memories, not just retrieve them. This is scientifically established. If a therapist asks the wrong questions, if a patient has expectations about what they should remember, if there's cultural information available about what alien abductions are supposed to be like, all of that can contaminate memories. Betty had read a book about UFOs. She had had vivid dreams. She had spoken extensively with Barney about those dreams for months before the hypnosis. Is it possible that all of this combined to create a coherent but false narrative under hypnosis? But wait, there's a problem with the pure false memory theory. Investigative journalist John Luttrell found 6 witnesses who saw the same object at the same time, in the same place, on the same night. The Project Blue Book files show radar detections before and after the Hill sighting. Something was in the sky that night, something real that multiple people saw, and that technical equipment detected. The question isn't whether the Hills saw something. They clearly saw something. The question is, what did they see? And did an abduction really happen, or was it a subsequent psychological construct? After the book was published, the Hills became unwitting public figures. They gave lectures. They appeared on radio and television programs. They were constantly contacted by researchers, skeptics, believers, and the curious. Barney hated attention. He had said from the beginning that the worst thing that could have happened to them was for this to become public. They were prominent citizens in New Hampshire. They had reputations to protect. Barney's blood pressure worsened. His ulcers worsened. The stress became unbearable. February 25th, 1969. Barney Hill Jr. died of a brain hemorrhage. He was only 46 years old. Betty was devastated. She lost not only her husband, but the only other person who truly understood what they had been through together. After Barney's death, something changed in Betty. He became a celebrity in the UFO community. He attended conferences, gave talks, and connected with other researchers and witnesses. But he also began reporting sightings, many sightings. Betty claimed she had literally seen hundreds of UFOs after her initial abduction. She organized nighttime expeditions to observe the sky. She claimed to have an invisible college of scientists from major laboratories who went out with her to study these UFOs and who supposedly collected tons of data, but never published anything. He began seeing UFOs in places where others saw helicopters or airplanes. He claimed they moved in unconventional ways that no one else could perceive. Her niece, Kathleen Martin, who had become an advocate for the Hills case, admitted to feeling frustrated. She was disgusted that she was destroying her credibility. She started with serious research in teams of scientists, and she went off on her own with crazy ideas. Years later, it was discovered that Betty had a brain tumor. This tumor likely caused the strange behavior in the last decades of his life. The visual hallucinations, the distorted perceptions of movement, the inability to distinguish between conventional objects and anomalous phenomena. Martin forgave her after finding out. She realized her aunt wasn't making up stories. Her brain was literally seeing things that weren't there. In 1991, Betty Hill announced that she was retiring from making public appearances. She was 72 years old and disappointed with the direction the field of ufology had taken. She said too many people with far-fetched ideas, fantasies, and imaginings were making UFO reports. The irony is palpable. Betty Hill, whose case had launched the entire modern alien abduction industry, now criticized the field for being too gullible. October 17, 2004. Betty Hill died of cancer at the age of 85. She never remarried. To the very end, she maintained that what she and Barney experienced that night in 1961 was real. It is impossible to overstate the impact of the Hill case on popular culture. Before 1961, encounters with aliens in popular culture were varied. Green Martians, tentacled invaders, robots, beings of pure energy. After 1966, when Fuller's book was published, there was a dominant archetype: the Greys. Small, grayish skin, large head, enormous black, almond-shaped eyes. No facial expression. Telepathic. This design, created by David Baker based on Hill's descriptions, became the gold standard for alien depictions. Show. Examples: Close Encounters, The X-Files, Signs, etc. Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The X-Files. Fire in the Sky. Signs. Countless films, series, books, comics, and video games. Everyone uses the Greys. The Abduction narrative. Show. Graph of the increase in abduction reports post-1966. The Hill case also established a narrative template for alien abductions. Strange lights in the sky. Vehicle that stops or malfunctions. Wasted time. Waking up in a different place. Fragmented memories. Complete memories recovered under hypnosis. Medical examination on board the ship. Telepathic communication. Release with partial amnesia. This sequence, first reported by the Hills, was replicated in thousands of subsequent abduction reports. Why? Is it because it represents a real and recurring alien experience? Or because it established a cultural script that people unconsciously follow when interpreting their own anomalous experiences? The memorials. In 2011, the state of New Hampshire erected an official historical marker in Lincoln, Grafton County, commemorating the Hill meeting. It is the first officially recognized government memorial to an alleged alien abduction in the United States. The marker is on Route 3, near the Indian Head Resort, right where the Hills reported their closest encounter. Peculiar memorial. The Irving Notch Express gas station on Route 3 features an 8-square-foot mural of a gray alien standing on a dark wooded road. The gas station bathroom is advertised as the first bathroom museum dedicated to alien abduction. They sell alien-themed hats, balloons, green golf balls with aliens printed on them, UFO crossing signs, and even a flying saucer-shaped juicer. The case that terrified Barney and Betty Hill, destroyed their privacy, and contributed to Barney's untimely death, is now a tourist attraction. The Academic Collection. Show. University of New Hampshire. In 2006, Betty's niece, Kathleen Martin, donated Betty and Barney Hill's papers to the Special Archives of the University of New Hampshire Library. The collection contains original correspondence, personal diaries, Betty's damaged dress, original drawings of the UFO and the beings, photographs, audio recordings, Betty's UFO sightings diary. It is one of the most comprehensive collections on a UFO case in any academic institution. So, after examining all the evidence, all the testimonies, all the theories, what really happened to Betty and Barney Hill that night? The honest truth is, we don't know, and we'll probably never know for sure. What we know for sure. Display list on screen. Undisputed facts. The Hills saw something in the sky on the night of September 19th, 1961. That something was also detected by radar and seen by other witnesses. They experienced lost time that they cannot explain. They had anomalous physical evidence. Stopped clocks, damaged dress, scuffed shoes, marks on the car. Both developed severe psychological symptoms after the event. Under hypnosis, they recounted consistent stories despite being hypnotized separately. They were respectable citizens with no history of seeking attention or prior interest in UFOs. Dr. Simon believed in his honesty, though not in the literalness of his recollections. What we don't know: unanswered questions. Where were they during the 2 missing hours? Why did their watches stop at exactly the same time? What caused the circular marks on the car trunk? What were the beeping sounds they described hearing? Why do Barney's descriptions under hypnosis match so perfectly with episodes of The Outer Limits that aired days earlier? If it was a psychological experience, how did they both develop the same narrative without communicating? If it was real, why isn't there more solid physical evidence? The main theories. Theory 1. Real alien abduction. In favor. Consistency of separate testimonies. Corroborating witnesses. Radar detections. Anomalous physical evidence. Lack of motivation to manufacture. Truthfulness verified by a medical professional. Against. Possible influence of popular media. Vulnerability of memory under hypnosis. Lack of definitive physical evidence. Dr. Simon did not believe in literal interpretation. Discredited star map. Theory 2. Misinterpreted real experience plus false memory. In favor. They saw something real, confirmed by radar and witnesses. Genuine psychological trauma. Hypnosis can create false memories. Influence of the outer limits in perfect timing. Betty had dreamed about the abduction before. Previous racial and psychological stress. Against. It does not fully explain the consistency between testimonies. It does not explain physical evidence. It does not explain the lost time. Requires multiple matches. Theory 3. Classified military experiment. In favor. Proximity to military bases. Military radar detections. The government never formally investigated. Era of Cold War and experimentation. Against. Zero documentary evidence. It does not explain the nature of beings. Highly speculative. My perspective. Personally, I think the truth probably lies somewhere between the explanations. I think Betty and Barney Hill saw something real that night, something that terrified them, something they couldn't explain. I also believe they experienced some kind of genuine psychological trauma, possibly exacerbated by the racial and personal stress they were already experiencing. And I believe that when they were subjected to hypnosis, a technique that we now know can create memories as well as retrieve them, they unconsciously constructed a coherent narrative based on Betty's dreams, cultural influences, and their own fears and expectations. But here's the important thing. I don't have to believe in literal abduction to respect their experience. Something happened to them. Something real. Something that marked them forever. Whether it was an alien spacecraft, an unknown atmospheric phenomenon, a classified military experiment, or a complex psychological construct born of trauma and stress, their experience was real for them. And the impact of that experience on their lives was undeniably devastating. Barney died at 46, his health destroyed by stress. Betty spent the rest of her life trying to understand what had happened, eventually losing credibility due to an undiagnosed brain tumor. That's real, that's tragic, and that deserves to be taken seriously, regardless of whether you believe in the extraterrestrial explanation or not. The Betty and Barney Hill case teaches us something profound about human nature, memory, and our place in the universe. It shows us how extraordinary experiences can be both genuine and misinterpreted at the same time. How the human mind, faced with the inexplicable, constructs narratives to make sense of chaos. It reminds us that the line between what is real and what is remembered is more blurred than we would like to admit. The Hill case has a dual legacy. On one hand, it is a solemn reminder of two real people who lived through something they could not explain, who were involuntarily thrust into the public eye, and who paid a terrible price for their experience. On the other hand, it became the origin of one of the most ubiquitous tropes in modern popular culture. Gray aliens are everywhere now, in memes, Halloween, souvenir shops, science fiction movies. They've become a cultural joke. Barney and Betty never wanted that. They wanted answers. They wanted peace. They wanted to be believed without being made into a spectacle. In the end, the Hill case leaves us with the most fundamental question of all. Are we alone? If the Hills were indeed taken aboard an extraterrestrial spacecraft, then the answer is a resounding no. It would mean that there are intelligent beings out there observing us, studying us, interacting with us in ways we are only beginning to understand. If her experience was a psychological construct, that's fascinating in its own way, too. It tells us something profound about the human mind, about our need for narrative, about how we process trauma and the unknown. Either way, history matters. In the decade since 1961, we have learned a lot. We now know that there are billions of planets in our galaxy. We know that the building blocks of life, water, amino acids, organic molecules, are ubiquitous in the universe. The question is no longer whether life exists elsewhere. Statistically, it's almost impossible that it doesn't. The question is, has it arrived here? Has it visited us? Is it visiting us now? And if he did, why in such an elusive way? Why is there no definitive, incontrovertible evidence? Those questions remain unanswered, and perhaps, ultimately, it is appropriate that the case that launched the modern phenomenon of alien abductions remains, itself unsolved. Today, if you drive along Route 3 through the White Mountains of New Hampshire, you will pass the historic marker commemorating Betty and Barney Hill. You will pass by the Indian Head Resort, where tourists occasionally stop to take pictures next to the memorial. You'll pass by the Irving gas station with its alien mural and its bathroom museum. The mountains are still there. The road still winds through the same dark forests. The night sky is still the same sky Betty observed through binoculars more than 60 years ago. What did they really see that night? The mountains know it. The sky knows it. But they don't speak. Betty Hill, in one of her last interviews, said something that has always stuck with me. I was raised to believe in the scientific method. You don't believe in anything unless it can be dissected or put in a box. I don't believe in ghost stories. Before this experience, my attitude was that anyone who believed in something I didn't understand, anyone who seemed too radical, I considered a kind of crackpot. Now I think I have more tolerance for new ideas, even if I can't accept them myself. Perhaps that is the real lesson of the Hill case. It's not about whether aliens are real or not. It's about humility in the face of the unknown. It's about recognizing that there are things in this universe we don't understand, that we may never fully understand. It's about keeping our minds open without our brains falling apart. It's about balancing healthy skepticism with genuine curiosity. And it's about treating people who report extraordinary experiences with compassion and respect, even when we don't believe every word of their story. Because at the end of the day, Betty and Barney Hill were just two people trying to make sense of something that was beyond their comprehension. Like all of us, when we look at the night sky and wonder, what's out there? And there you have it. The complete case of Betty and Barney Hill, one of the most documented, influential, and mysterious encounters in the history of ufology. Real alien abduction? Misinterpreted psychological trauma? Something entirely different that we haven't yet considered? Leave your opinion in the comments. I'd love to know, which theory do you find most convincing? Are there any details in the case that particularly catch your attention? Do you have your own experience with unexplained phenomena? If you enjoyed this video and want more in-depth investigations into paranormal cases and extraterrestrial encounters, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episodes. We will cover cases such as the Roswell incident, the Travis Walton encounter, the Phoenix Lights, the Rendlesham Forest incident, and many more. Like this post if you enjoy this in-depth research format. Share it with someone who might be interested in these topics. And if you want to support the channel so it can continue making this kind of quality content, you can do so through your support method. Until next time, keep looking at the sky. But don't forget to question what you see.